Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. Today's episode is being filmed and recorded off-site at a different location, so the audio may sound a little bit strange today versus other episodes. My apologies for that. Should be back to regular recording tomorrow. Okay, first up, the big news in US-China relations this week is the planned delegation trip to Taiwan of US lawmakers led by US Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. We discussed the initial reactions to the trip yesterday, including the observations by some US-based analysts that we may see an August Taiwan crisis if the trip, the most significant of its type for the US in decades, goes ahead. Other US policymakers, like former US Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, argued that the US should move from strategic ambiguity vis-à-vis Taiwan to strategic clarity when it comes to cross-strait affairs, and even re-examine its one China policy. Unsurprisingly, Beijing isn't happy, and the timing of an American guided missile destroyer sailing through the Taiwan Strait on Tuesday, the third time in a week, likely didn't help. But there is also another trip provoking angry protestations from Beijing. This week, the European Parliament's Vice President, Nicolas Beer, arrived in Taiwan, leading a delegation for a 3-day visit to, in the words of Chinese state media, quote, show support for the secessionists in the island. In response to the trip, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin expressed yesterday, quote, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. The One China principle is a widely recognized basic norm in international relations and the political foundation of China-Europe relations. The European Parliament is an official institution of the EU, hence its members and senior officials are expected to abide by the One China principle. End quote. Multinationals still hurting from the miscalculations regarding the likelihood of a Russian invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent Western sanctions response are not taking their chances with regards to a Taiwan Straits crisis. Quote, yes, all multinationals are doing scenario planning, in particular after the Ukraine invasion, which triggered Taiwan assessments. It is not that headquarters believe that Xi Jinping might consider an invasion anytime soon, but companies want to check what a blockade or war would do to their global setup. In an interview in New York on Tuesday, former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger observed, quote, Biden and previous administrations have been too much influenced by the domestic aspects of the view of China. It is, of course, important to prevent Chinese or any other country's hegemony, but that is not something that can be achieved by endless confrontations. End quote. Several hours ago, responding to a question about the Pelosi trip, US President Joe Biden expressed, quote, the military thinks it's not a good idea right now, but I don't know what the status of it is. End quote. As for the Taiwanese themselves, the current Taipei administration has welcomed the news of the US delegation. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit the like button, and for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help me keep this sustainable, like I say, it's just me making these every day. If you'd like to help me keep doing this, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. I really want the channel to be primarily supported by subscribers like you guys and not have to rely on corporate sponsorship. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Now, let's move to the Chinese economy, and we have a couple of major updates, and then we're going to finish by looking at the housing crisis, which continues to develop and deepen this week. On Tuesday evening in Beijing, the People's Republic of China Premier Li Keqiang attended the so-called special virtual dialogue with global business leaders hosted by the World Economic Forum. During his remarks, the Premier, who for months now has had the non-enviable task of keeping the economy from falling off the rails in the face of zero COVID policy implementation, expressed that after a bad second quarter, the general economy may be stabilizing, but, quote, we are keenly aware that the recovery of the economy is not yet firmly established, and painstaking efforts are required to keep overall economic performance stable. End quote. This is quite a statement from the Premier. He also added, quote, we will take a realistic approach and do the best within our means to strive for fairly good results in economic development for the whole year." End quote. Those well-versed in the dry bureaucratic language of Beijing speak will understand that this statement means that the government, or at least the State Council, which Li heads, does not believe China can meet its annual growth target this year, even with the large stimulus being poured into the economy. Failure to meet the growth target in such a sensitive year shows just how poor in shape the economy is looking to policymakers currently. Meanwhile, on Tuesday this week also, the central government formally launched a state-owned iron ore giant to, quote, consolidate China's massive mining investments and coordinate global purchases of steel-making materials, end quote. With a registered capital of 20 billion RMB, approximately $3 billion, China Mineral Resources Group was registered with businesses spanning mining, ore processing and trading, international freight services, supply chain management, and asset management services. Quote, creation of the enterprise is seen as part of China's long-pursued goal of enhancing its position in the global iron ore trade. China produces more than half the world's crude steel and consumes the lion's share of global iron ore. In 2021, China purchased nearly 70% of the world's iron ore exports, spending about $180 billion. End quote. The housing crisis, which is now bleeding into other sectors of the real economy, including the financial sector, deepens this week. According to figures from a crowd-sourced document titled We Need Home, the mortgage boycott has spread to at least 301 housing projects in 91 cities as of the beginning of this week. Goldman Sachs calculates that 2 trillion RMB, just shy of $300 billion worth of loans are affected. According to new data released by the National Bureau of Statistics, home prices have declined in almost half of the 70 monitored large and medium-sized Chinese cities in the past 2 years. In almost 2/5 of the urban hubs, prices slumped to a 3-year low, and in 6 cities, including Zhengzhou, the epicenter of the recent bank protests and mortgage boycotts, the cost of buying housing slid to a 5-year low. Henan Asset Management Co. and government-backed developer Zhengzhou Real Estate Group will jointly set up a fund for the real estate sector. However, further details regarding this fund have yet to be published. According to eHouse China, Zhengzhou, Henan's capital city, has recorded the most mortgage boycott notices by homebuyers. Quote, Zhengzhou's fund is the first state-backed bailout proposal in China as the government grapples with a property crisis that risks engulfing the country's banks and middle-class homeowners. End quote. Other local governments from major cities across the country have established working groups to deal with the cascading number of mortgage boycott cases. Popular policy suggestions include protecting escrow accounts, bailing out developers, reducing liquidity pressures, and state-run developer takeovers. Indeed, as we saw over last weekend, central government financial regulators have already urged banks to increase lending to developers to finish projects, and promising the public that projects would be finished. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. My apologies again for the audio quality. Should be back to normal by tomorrow or at the very latest on Saturday. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.